Hi, I'm Drew Russo, a member of Lynn Community Television, and welcome to a panel discussion on the future of local media. As recently as the early 2000s, the North Shore had an information ecosphere of local newspapers, radio stations, and public access television channels with full-time reporting staff to tell the stories that were happening in our neighborhoods. However, the landscape has changed considerably in the past few decades. Media consolidation has resulted in a number of daily newspapers sharing staff, often telling the same stories, and without the same level of local coverage. With the recent sale of North Shore 104.9 to a national organization, the last remaining radio newscast and discussion program left the air. Local cable access television provides everyone an opportunity to produce their own content, but dwindling cable revenues in the streaming age have left operators wondering what the future holds. And what about social media, with engaged groups on Facebook, popular Twitter accounts, and blogs trying to fill the void? Here to discuss these issues with us are Senator Brendan Crighton, the state senator for the communities of Linfield, Marblehead, Nahant, Swampscott, and Saugus. Senator Crighton began his career working for State Senator Tom McGee, eventually serving as Chief of Staff. Brendan previously served as Ward 5 City Councilor and Councilor at Large in Lynn. In 2014, Brendan was elected to the House of Representatives, and in 2018, he was elected to his current position. Brendan and his wife, Andrea, reside in Lynn with their son, Nathaniel, and their daughter, Eleanor. Carolina Trujillo is a native of Cali, Colombia, and has lived in the greater Boston area for 24 years. In 2016, she joined the staff of the Essex Media Group as the Community Relations Director and publisher of La Voz newspaper, where she was in charge of developing and implementing culturally sensitive media interventions that capture the specific needs of Latinos residing on the North Shore. She currently serves as Executive Director of Citizens Inn, a nonprofit organization that focuses on disrupting the patterns of homelessness and hunger of people living on the North Shore. Seth Albaum is Executive Director of Lynn Community Television, a former high school media and literacy video production teacher, and has been involved in community media since 1996, just after graduating Emerson College. From 2008 through 2016, he also ran a hyper-local website called Lynn Happens. Dan Kennedy is a professor of journalism at Northeastern University. He has written 2 books about journalism in the internet age and is currently writing a third with Ellen Clegg titled What Works? The Future of Local News. Dan and Ellen also have a weekly podcast that you can find at whatworks.news. Dan is a longtime contributor to GBH News, and from 1998 to 2001 was a regular on the station's weekly media program, Beat the Press. His blog, Media Nation, is online at dankennedy.net. And Dan, we'll start with you today to help us set the stage for this discussion, both regionally and nationally, as to the state of play with local media, and specifically on how we can address what you've termed news deserts.
Well, thank you a lot, Drew, and it's good to be with all of you today. You probably already know that there are plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. And we're going to get to the optimism, but we'll start by laying out what some of the problems are. According to researcher Penny Abernathy of Northwestern University, some 2,500 newspapers, almost a quarter of the total across the country, have shut down since 2005. More than a fifth of Americans live in news deserts that lack the reliable journalism that they need to govern themselves in a democracy. Many of the newspapers that continue to publish could be called ghost papers, with so few staff members that they have little or no ability to cover the communities that they purportedly serve. The effects of this are clear. According to mounds of academic research, the decline of local news correlates with lower voter turnout, fewer candidates running for public office, and even higher municipal borrowing costs, as lenders charge what might be referred to as a corruption tax, since they know that there are no independent watchdogs to keep an eye on waste and abuse. So what happened? Well, essentially, the internet came along and blew apart the business model that paid for journalism. Until the past decade or so, advertising accounted for about 80% of a newspaper's revenues. Craigslist destroyed the highly lucrative classified ad business by offering most of its services for free. And then Google and Facebook took most of the rest of those ad revenues. As a result, even newspapers that were forward-looking in trying to reinvent themselves in the digital space found it was difficult, if not impossible, to bring in the revenues that they needed. But there's another important part to this story that doesn't always get told, and that's the role that corporate greed has played in undermining the newspaper business. Giant newspaper chains owned by the likes of Gannett and Alden Global Capital have sucked whatever remaining profits they can out of the newspapers they own by laying off journalists and selling off real estate. Rather than investing in news coverage that people might be willing to pay for, they've taken an approach that economists refer to as harvesting, taking whatever revenues they can out of their newspapers until there's nothing left, after which they shut them down or sell them off. Those of us who live in Massachusetts can see what Gannett has been doing this year, closing weekly newspapers and reassigning most of their weekly reporters to regional beats. But what's happening in Massachusetts is not unique. Fortunately, there are alternatives to this sad story. Hundreds of news organizations, many of them new, are rising up to fill the gap. Many are digital-only nonprofits. Some are for-profits. Some still offer print. Some are thriving. Others are just getting by. My reporting partner, Alan Clegg, and I have been traveling across the country to tell the stories of these news organizations, from tiny digital projects like the Mendocino Voice in Northern California, to legacy print newspapers like the Storm Lake Times Pilot in Iowa, to MLK 50, which covers social justice issues in Memphis, Tennessee. Our project is called What Works? The Future of Local News. And again, you can listen to our podcast if you're interested in whatworks.news. Our book is scheduled to be published either sometime later in 2023 or early 2024. Now, there's no substitute for on-the-ground entrepreneurship, but there are other ideas afoot as well. Federal legislation has been proposed to make it easier for newspapers to band together and negotiate with Google and Facebook to obtain a slice of their advertising revenues, some of which comes from repurposing their journalism. Another bill would create a series of tax credits for subscribers, advertisers, and publishers. Journalists are rightly wary of government assistance lest it compromise their independence. But at the very least, we're living at a time when some new thinking is needed. At a time when many Americans are highly engaged with national news, and especially with the divisive talk shows that are carried on cable outlets, local journalism can be a way to bring us together. We all want quality schools, a police department that keeps us safe while respecting individual rights, and a health system that serves everyone. And yes, even these issues have gotten caught up in the ugly rhetoric driven by the national blue-red divide. But community journalism at its best can be a way to bring people of different viewpoints together so that they work toward common goals. The challenge is to find ways of providing such journalism at a time when technological, economic, and social forces make that more difficult than ever. We have a great panel, and I know you're all eager to hear what their thoughts are as well. So thank you.
Dan, I'm gonna stick with you for just a moment, though, because you talked about a lot of great things here, including media consolidation. We had hoped to have Chris Stevens with us, who was a reporter here at the Daily Item and then the Marblehead Reporter, and she was one of the journalists that was downsized by Gannett earlier this year. So, in thinking about her story, and I know that you did some good work on this, talking about sort of executive compensation at Gannett related to what the median salary is for aspiring journalists or even journalists that have been working for a long time. So what advice would you give, and I open up to the panel to have a conversation about this, What advice would you give to aspiring journalists or storytellers about how we can do this in such a consolidated media environment?
Well, the funny thing is, not every journalist wants to be an entrepreneur, and I get that. And the skills that journalists do bring to the table, reporting, photography, editing, social media, those are all going to be incredibly important moving into the future. But if we've seen anything in the last year here in Eastern Massachusetts, it's that when there is a void, journalists find a way to keep on keeping on. Now, I understand that Chris is with us now, which is great, and maybe she can talk about this a little bit. But we have seen startups being launched in community after community in Eastern Massachusetts since Gannett went on a massive wave of closing weekly papers and reassigning weekly reporters earlier this year. Now, Chris, who is working in Marblehead now, where she had worked previously, is somebody who is at one of just 3 independent news projects in Marblehead. So they've gone from one chain newspaper to 3 independent projects. And I think that's the kind of development that I'm very optimistic about. And so I don't know, what would you like to add to that, Chris?
I'm not working for the Marblehead News. I'm doing some consulting for them, and I'm doing some freelance for them. But it is being run by 2 former Gannett employees, Will Dowd and Chris Olson, and Chris Olson is working as a consultant on that as well. And it warms my heart. I'm really, really, really thrilled to see these independent papers crop up where Gannett has left the communities high and dry, because it just, the whole thing with Gannett and the way that they win. And I'm not going to disparage my former employer because I can't, but
the rest of us will.
Yeah, okay. But it just broke my heart because I see it as most of you as the end, just another nail in the coffin of community journalism. I've spent my entire career in community journalism. And it's what I love, and it's what I think is just so important. So it thrills me to see these local papers cropping up and doing pretty well for startups.
Chris, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to come on. I went over a little bit of your bio before you came on, but I think one of the coolest things that you shared with us is that you were actually there when Daryl Martini, the cosmic muffin from the WBCN days, was there to get his marriage license. And it's those kinds of stories, that I think are so important for us to tell. Did you want to sort of jump into on that whole question about how we can develop and help cultivate aspiring journalists, people that want to get into journalism today, to get into community journalism? Are they going to have to move in the direction of what Will Dowd and Chris Olson are doing, or do you think there's still opportunities to do that in more of the traditional media framework?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Chris.
I hope it's a cyclical thing. I do think that, I got to say, because we talk to a lot of college kids, we used to work with a lot of kids from Endicott and from Salem State. Will worked with some kids. One of my colleagues worked with some kids from BU that all did internships. And we used to have a lot of high school kids that would do internships. And, it's a sad thing to say, but the first thing we would tell them is don't go into print journalism because it's a dying, it's a dinosaur. I hope that's not true. I do think that they can make a difference if they go the route of joining in one of these little startups. And that's going to depend largely on circumstance because there's not a lot of money in those, at least right now. So it's going to depend on their financial situation as to whether they can afford to do that or not. Otherwise,
in general, though, Chris, wouldn't you say that people who are getting jobs at especially nonprofit digital startups are, they're not making a princely sum, but they're making more money than they would have made at a Gannett paper?
I don't know. I hope so. I hope they are, because we were not making a princely sum. And that's, you think, why did you stay? Well, because we stayed because we loved what we did. We loved the job, and the job was everything to us. So yeah, I do. I know the Marblehead News is paying better than what we were making. Yes. So I do hope that is the route, but they're a nonprofit, so it's gonna, that's always going to be a concern. It's always going to be a battle. I have high hopes for the ones that are out there, because a lot of them, because the community really bought into them. When people had discovered what was going on with the Marblehead Reporter, and again, when I got laid off, um, they asked me what they could do, and I pointed them in the direction of this startup in Marblehead and said, this is where you want to put your energy. And so many of them were saying, like, I'm there. Not only do I want a subscription, I will donate to this paper. That they really wanted to be a part of it because it was that important to them. And so I hope that's happening in other communities. I know there's other startups going on in Newton, and I think Lexington, and a bunch of other papers. So I hope there's
Concord and Brookline and
Yeah.
on and on
Yep.
and on.
I think here locally too, and I want to give Carolina a chance to jump in. In 2014, the Essex Media Group was formed by a group of local investors headed by former Item managing editor Ted Grant to really preserve local coverage in our area, resulting in the purchase of the Daily Item. And that includes coverage of the City of Lynn's majority Spanish-speaking community. Carolina Trujillo, you are the founder of La Voz, which is a free bi-weekly paper in Spanish. Can you talk a little bit about how Essex Media Group and La Voz specifically are serving a community that historically has been underserved in our local media?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I can echo Chris's voices and Dan. The message is clear. There is a significant need for local media. And when we talk about minority communities, even more so. Minority communities, the mission of La Voz newspaper is to empower communities, empower Latino communities through the gift of information. So we are literally providing information to try to get all of these communities to be part of something bigger, to be part of the mainstream, right? We have noticed, as you said, that historically minority communities are disserviced, underserved, disenfranchised, and right now we're asking for them to elevate their voices. How do we ask such a big call when we're not providing the tools necessary for them to do that? So La Voz was created precisely to fit that goal. We cover the city of Lynn, Salem, Peabody, and Revere. We are the only centralized newspaper in Spanish. I use the team of the Daily Item, and the goal of this is to also make the mainstream paper more equitable and make sure that they follow a lens of equity and that they're covering our community as we present in the community, not only one subset of the community, but all of us. All means all. So that was part of my role as community relations director, building those bridges. And then as La Voz newspaper publisher, it was more to bring that focus into my community, empower them through information. And obviously we all know a person who's informed can probably aspire to act, form criteria, and develop some kind of empowerment to be able to do something about it, about anything, good or bad, do something. And that's what we want. So that was the whole purpose of Essex Media Group behind La Voz. And I was given the task to go out and do a community effort. It was community centric from the get-go, really looking into community, interviewing people in the community, talking to them, seeing if they actually wanted a paper, because that's another assumption we're making, right? That people want something. And then definitely there was some validation, and we created La Voz, and now it's been around for 6 years. It's a baby, it's a toddler. It's ever changing, which is beautiful, because I think that's one of the issues that we currently have, that some media outlets are so stuck in their ways that change comes difficult, comes to a price, right? And some publishers are really hard-headed at sticking to what they know. I think that I was very fortunate to work with a publisher like Ted Grant, who allowed me to do my job and be in the community and represent that voice that was voided. So I was fortunate that way.
So one of the key roles that local media has played is coverage of community groups that are doing good work in the community. You know, Carolina, now you've transitioned from your work in media to running a nonprofit organization that is doing a lot to address issues of hunger and homelessness throughout the North Shore. How are you finding that coverage of local organizations like yours has changed over the time that you've been in local media? And you talk about equity, whether it's media equity, digital equity, sort of how can we achieve that in telling those stories, and maybe what are some of the ways that we need to rethink how we get the word out about some of that important good work that's being done in the community that was often told by our local storytellers that maybe aren't going to make the Boston Globe or the regional media conglomerates?
Absolutely. So I think that the relationship has changed. I think that now the reporter is less empowered and understands that they need people as much as people need them. And I think that having that mindset has allowed them to really think creatively on how to approach and build relationships with the communities they're serving, which didn't happen before. Reporters were these gods that chose and picked whatever they wanted to bring the light to, and then they were treated as such, like, oh my God, the reporter is here. Right now, because of social media, I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. Everybody, I think, and pardon my French, but I think it's one of the most prostituted professions right now, journalism. Everybody and their mom believes themselves to be a journalist, a media reporter. I don't know. You wouldn't find a person trying to operate in an operating room just because you felt like you were good at it. I wanna open you up and take out your pancreas because I'm good at it. For some reason, journalism lends itself to do this, and that's why we have such a confusion of what we are providing, and the responsibility and the ethics behind journalism are completely diluted right now.
Oh,
And
she's
people,
so right.
So
right?
Chris and then
people
Dan.
and people don't know what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's not, because anybody with a platform will become and crown themselves the queen of media. And that's, I find that that's problematic. But going back to your original question, I think that building those critical relationships with organizations like Citizens In, like the one I represent, is important, because we have to also tell those stories of people who are game changers in our communities. We have to make sure that people not only understand that there's resources available, but we also have to tell the other story, which is how is this organization playing a crucial role in the fabric of who we are and our identity, our culture as Peabody or as a Revere or as Lynn or whatever our community is. So I think that pedestal that journalists were on, soon enough, they become mortals. No,
I don't ever remember sitting on that pedestal, but that's okay.
a demigod. You're a demigod, Chris.
Wow.
So I do want to come back because I think that there's some space here to have a conversation about social media, and we will a little bit later in the program. But when you talk about sort of lifting up those stories, Lynn Community Television is an organization that seems to have made a strong bet on local coverage. There's a weekly newscast. There is time devoted to longer form interviews, discussion programs, and you broadcast shows in multiple languages, Seth Albaum. But there's also a shift from people watching TV on cable to streaming platforms like Netflix and Peacock. So how does that affect what you're doing here at LCTV? And how does the shift from buying cable, people buying cable to have in their homes, impact your ability to do so?
Well, we're losing money because our funding is based on the amount of basic cable subscribers in the community. Anything from basic cable to the full package with all the special channels, we still get the same amount from each subscriber, whether it's Comcast or Verizon, the two we have in this community. And yet at the same time, we've changed over the years and we've adapted to the current media landscape. We publish online, we stream our city council meetings on Facebook and YouTube, and we're providing a service for an audience that also doesn't have cable. So why is their funding still tied to cable? because it's based on legislation that dates back to 1984. And it really needs to be updated because they're saying, hey, we're using, these for-profit companies are using public right-of-ways to deliver their content. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if the content is digital or streaming, it's still content and it's still flowing over the same infrastructure. So why are we not seeing that revenue? And I know there's a streaming bill at the State House. I believe it's H130 that looks to rectify that situation, at least on the state level. But it's really a federal issue. And getting back to local news, we're very lucky to have a news director here at Lynn Community Television. Danny Vittori and Makala Kabongo, prior to that, who's still with us part-time, are covering events throughout the city. And we have a community media producer. He used to work actually in for a mainstream television outlet in Boston, covering community events as a community media producer. We're very fortunate because of the size city we are to be able to pick up some of that slack of local coverage needs. But we can't do hard news. We can't do investigative journalism. We don't have those resources. And I would say that talking about new nonprofit outlets or online outlets, don't forget about public access. We already have the 501c3. We already have some staff in an office and computers and anyone thinking of starting a local news nonprofit, I think really ought to talk to their media access center about doing so and partnering as a way to help save local access.
So you mentioned
I couldn't agree more with that, Seth. And I would say that the relationship can be as simple as, you know, having the editor interview somebody on local access once a week. And that's another way of distributing your journalism. And it's a way of getting the word out about your news project. That would be the simplest. But as you say, you can do more in-depth partnerships as well.
Yeah. And, you know, we're one of the few free speech platforms left, even online. Google, you know, which owns YouTube, can take a video down based on a set of rules or an algorithm or a bot, whatever you want to call it, that flags something for review that we can't take down. You know, we're one of the last electronic platforms that is really you know, an open platform for anybody, any viewpoint, anybody who lives in Lynn as an individual for a mere $25 a year gets the training, the equipment, the studio time, and gets to distribute online, not just on cable. You know, and I think, you know, one of our challenges is, you know, letting people know that we're here for them and not just for watching school committee and city council, which is our other channel, our government channel. And, you know, to the point that, you know, anybody can think they're a journalist nowadays. I kind of jumped into that a little myself, admittedly, with linhappens.com. No longer online, so don't look for it. But, you know, anybody who has those aspirations can have a show here. And then share it online, and they can share it on their social media too.
I just want to jump in for a minute because, you know, you talked about sort of the revenue that you get related to cable access, and I want to give Senator Crighton a chance to weigh in on the larger issues in a minute. But I think it's important to note too that LCTV is a membership-driven organization. You know, yes. you do have members, but sort of what is the revenue split there? You know, how dependent are local access operators like LCTV on money that you receive from the cable companies?
We're mostly dependent on the money we receive from the cable companies. I mean, let's face it, charging individuals $25 a year, seniors and vets $15, students are free, and nonprofits start nonprofits and other organizations start at 125 a year, and that includes up to 6 people and all the training. And after training, you can walk out of here with a camera that can record 4K video. And our channels are still standard def, but they can post the 4K part online. There's not a better deal in the city, actually, for citizen journalism or just as a creative outlet.
So I want to give Senator Crighton a chance to weigh in. And don't worry, Senator Crighton, I'm not going to ask you about that line item that you're going to put in for cable access operators like LCTV. But I do want you to talk a little bit about the work that you've done with former Representative Lori Ehrlich, because both of you have really been concerned about the future of local journalism for several years now. In 2019, you both filed legislation to create a commission to study the lack of journalism in underserved communities. Can you talk about sort of what the intent was behind that legislation? And I know the law was enacted in 2021. If you could tell us sort of where the commission stands these days and what's the future of that commission?
Yep, absolutely. First, Drew, thanks to you for moderating this panel. Looking at my fellow panelists here, we go way back. I think of having Seth's website, lynnhappens.com, and my favorites, on my internet tab back before social media was delivering us information, and running for Ward 5, and then as a city councilor, how often I would refresh that page, and then later working with Chris when she was over at the Item and in other newspapers, and providing such a wonderful service, and then with Carolina when she came over, and really opening up huge doors and opportunity for so much of the community with Lavaz. And Dan, we got a chance to work together a bit up here through your help and support for Rep. Ehrlich's and my efforts of really establishing a foundation for a lot of that. So I have to give Laurie all the credit in the world on this. She brought me in just to be a partner over in the Senate, but it was something that I felt passionate about. And again, not saying that government has, should have that direct connection with media. We need them to be an entity that holds us accountable, and you need to kind of keep some space there. And Dan had alluded to that a bit earlier when he talked about some of the federal efforts to provide assistance to this industry. But I thought, my interest was in having a hard conversation about how we get out of this. So I think everyone could kind of see it happening in our democracy without a robust media, and in particular local media. The electorate has no information to base their decisions off of on who they vote for and what they vote for or what they advocate for. So for me, we have been lucky in having a daily paper with the Item in Lynn, but for my colleagues, when I bring that up, they kind of, they smirk at me at first as if it's something that's been gone a long time for them. And many of these communities don't have a daily. And as we talked about, in many of the weeklies, they've been bought up. So their only connection with their constituents in terms of getting information out is through their own, social media channels. They also, in terms of accountability, if we're not being asked the hard questions or being presented with alternative viewpoints or having, regular coverage of what we're doing at the State House or in city halls or in boards of selectmen meetings or town meeting or a community meeting, no one's going to be informed. And that for me was very concerning. So, the commission was voted into law. It was a big step for us. It took much longer than we would have liked to get there. Unfortunately, I think COVID, as well as a series of leadership changes and some of the committee posts, have delayed this. And I know it's disappointing to folks that have been involved, but some things take time. I'm hopeful that the commission gets ramped up soon, because the work that they have to do is so crucial, and think of whether it's, policy solutions or, creative out of the box thinking. And I'm so happy that there's, some unique ideas and some work being done over in Marblehead, from what was a devastating blow to what could be kind of a new way of doing things and a new way of getting information out there. And Drew, me, I ramble, so I'm going to try to land the plane quickly here. But when I go out, I was at a classroom today, and I'm regularly speaking to community groups. And one thing I try to stress upon folks when we're talking kind of generally what it is I do here and what the State House is, what goes on at the State House, is to take them down from the national level, which is all they see and all they hear or all they'll read about, and bring them back to the local level. And that's what happens in City Hall and what happens at the State House. because they're not going to see that. State House News subscriptions aren't, hitting the masses in our district. So it's important, I think, where these decisions probably at the state and local level have a bigger impact on the daily basis into daily lives, that people know what's going on. So thank you again for this opportunity, and what I hope will be an ongoing conversation as we start to grapple with what is really a turning point in our democracy and in our country.
So we have a few minutes left, and a couple of general things, because there are so many topics that we could discuss, but people have been hitting on social media throughout the conversation. And so question that I kind of want to throw out to the group is, are we all becoming journalists in a sense? And what does that mean for the future of local media?
I think what Carolina said, it makes it very confusing. You have to be so careful about where you're getting your information from, and is it a valid source, or are you just picking up gossip from the people next door? I mean, there is a paper that has started in one community, and there are a lot of things that they're doing well, but a lot of things, there's a lot of mistakes that they're making too that could possibly get them in trouble. And one of the things, they claim to adhere to journalistic standards, but none of them on there are journalists. None of them have gone to school for it. None of them have ever done it. None of them, so it makes me wonder, where exactly they're getting their list of standards from. I think it makes it a scary world out there. The fact that everybody thinks they can be a journalist.
I couldn't agree more with you, Chris. And I think that people nowadays tend to confuse news with opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that people are covering supposedly what they consider news is by giving their opinion and their subjective view on whatever they see is going on, without any in-depth investigating, researching, talking to other people that are involved. Nothing. It's just about the way I perceive it, the way I see it, the way I filter it out, and then I share it with the world, and I give that as, this is my gift to you, as information and news. Well, it's not. It's your opinion. And
that's why I was a media literacy teacher. And we need media literacy in schools so badly. It's not an English elective meant to improve your essay writing skills for the MCAS. It's a life skills class.
I agree.
That's true.
Oh, please.
I might have a different take on this. I mean, I agree largely with what Chris and Carolina have said, but let me put just a little bit of a twist on it. When we started down the road toward putting news online, I would say at this point, almost 30 years ago, a lot of us were very optimistic about what citizen journalism might bring to the table. We imagined that professional journalists and amateur journalists working together could create something, better than anything we'd ever seen before. And honestly, I really don't think that a lot of what we do as journalists is rocket science, or, to use Chris's comparison, surgery, but it takes time. And the idea that you're going to get ordinary people to sit through a 3-hour school committee meeting and then go home and try to come up with a fair-minded report of what you saw, well, you know what? They have to work for a living. They have to feed their families. They can't do that. So I think the real value that we bring to the table as professional journalists, is that we are paid to sit there and get the story. And most of the time we're not paid enough to do that, but at least that's what our function is. And we take it seriously, and we try to bring some ethical standards to it. It's not that people who don't have a journalism background can't do it. It's that they have other things they need to do with their lives. And we are essentially the eyes and ears of the public.
That's what I
Dan, see, the problem with that, I totally agree with you. But I think that the problem with what you just said is precisely that the public doesn't understand who's doing it, because they're kind of like, they have all the background to do it and do it right, versus who's doing it and they don't have the time to do it. So they're going to do a half whatever to just get it out. So I think, and people don't
I
distinguish
agree with that too.
which is what.
Well,
ahead,
you had
Chris.
said something interesting. You were like, in the beginning, the idea was that professional and sort of the average citizen could work together. That's a great idea. I mean, we used to have people at the Reporter. We had a lot of people that wrote local stuff for us, but we worked with them. So if they said something completely off the rails, we could be like, okay, you need an attribution. Do you know what an attribution is? And that's what you need. We could go back to them and say, all right, this is where we need to fix this up. That I think is great. I got no problem with that.
Yep.
But I do think, that there is, people that are just sort of calling themselves a journalist. Like you say, it just makes for a confusing world.
I think too, sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead.
It's so hard to have a conversation.
No, right.
No, I was just going to say, I think to your points on standards and all the panelists had raised these, it's about getting the facts out there, right? Again, in a world right now where the facts are so crucial in all of our decision making, and oftentimes, there aren't those editors or fact check, folks on any of these, on social media, or certainly some of these newer platforms that are jumping up, but they really do matter. And sadly, you see this in politics, and this isn't new, but you tell a lie enough, so many times, and eventually it sinks in as truth with people. Yeah. And that's why it's so crucial, for us as whether elected officials or people in the community, that the facts are getting out there, that they are checked. If I misspeak, if I get it wrong, I want to be called out on it, and I want to be able to find a way to better articulate, what I'm trying to get across. But we've seen it again and again in these campaigns, and I'm not going to be self-serving and point out which campaigns I'm talking about here in this election, but the facts matter, and we need people to have that level of trust that while maybe a newspaper may skew in a particular direction, but the news piece of it, not the opinion, the editorial page, the news piece of it needs to be factual and straightforward for people to understand and to trust.
And it also needs to be fair and balanced. I will say, when I left the Reporter, what I heard from most people was that they had always felt I was a fair reporter. And as far as I'm concerned, that was the highest compliment I could get, because it meant I was telling both sides and it was a balanced story. And I think that is just as important. Because otherwise,
it was not demigod. It was not demigod.
Right? Nobody ever said that to me.
I think for the last several years, we've been hearing this whole conversation about fairness, about balance, about a lack of trust in local media. You're the folks that have been on the ground, either as, in Senator Crichton's case, the person that takes the questions, and most of you asking the questions. What can we do to restore that balance?
You have to talk to both sides.
What I tell my students, and you can go right back to Walter Lippmann with this. If you're not careful, I'll give you my hour-and-a-half lecture on objectivity. Objectivity is the fair-minded pursuit of the truth. It's not balance. It's telling the truth.
I feel like you always have to be careful to talk to both sides. You can't.
You have to talk to both sides. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the main thing in keeping a story balanced is to make sure you have all viewpoints.
But you don't have to give them equal credence.
I honestly want to go back to people taking the time to actually develop a story. I think right now there is this sense of immediacy that everything needs to be in 30 seconds or less.
You got to get it. You got to be first. Yeah.
No, exactly. There is no time. That's why it's all opinions, because there's no time really to put into 30 seconds. What do you think, Chris? Oh, actually, Dan is contrasting your statement, Chris. Yeah. Dan said X. There is no time for that.
Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right, because everybody wants it now.
Going back to fundamentals is what I would think it's the right course of action. And we also have to go back to distinguishing that there's print media, there's audiovisuals, there's online media. Like, there are different portals to get information equally as valuable. We've deemed that online media is the most important part of media. It's not. Different. There are people who still enjoy having things in their hands and passing pages, like myself. I know I'm a dinosaur, but I enjoy that. I enjoy a book, having the book, it's the smell of books I enjoy. I don't think kids nowadays are going to know what books are, to tell you the truth. I think they're going to unlearn to write because everything you have to type.
Yeah.
So there are basic skill sets that we're looking into losing because we've deemed that online stuff is the best thing as a society. And I would suggest that we go back to fundamentals and to basics. That's just my humble opinion.
I think as we close out, that's a great segue into our last question. And I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on it for a moment. What is the future of local media in your mind? And are you optimistic about it?
I am optimistic about it. I'll jump in. I think what Carolina said, I think it's going to be a variety of platforms. It already is. And I think that's only going to grow. I also agree with her that digital is not the end all be all, but it is going to be a very big, I mean, there's just no denying. It's not like it's going away. I mean, I don't think it's a fad. I think it's here to stay. So I think, that is just going to have to, more people are going to have to embrace it, but we're going to have to be more careful with how we treat it.
Mm-hmm. I think it could be complementary, to tell you the truth. And I think that there is a great need for local media. So I don't, I'm not optimistic about the future, but I know that there is a need. And if we go by need, if we do a needs assessment, we are going to determine that this is one of those pieces that as a community, we should be investing time and effort and resources for, because I can get any type of information from Colombia. And I can go online and get it. But I know that people are going to lack information about the superintendent search. Where are they going to find that?
Yeah, my street was closed down today and I couldn't figure out why. You're absolutely right.
Until people realize the importance of the place they live, it's not all about Washington. It's about little street where you live that is closed, and now you're stuck in your house and you can't make it to your appointment. That matters to you today. And I don't think that people have made that connection yet, or at least not to the level of importance that I think they should be having it.
I agree.
I'm very optimistic. I think that once you clear out of the way the newspapers that are owned by hedge funds and corporate chains, you see that what's left over is doing reasonably well. I like to talk about startups, but there are a number of legacy newspapers that are doing okay. And we're talking about one of them today, the Evening Item in Lynn. There are hundreds of independent local news projects around the country that are doing the job of covering their communities and serving the information needs of the people who live there. And I think it's only going to keep growing. There will be places that are not well served. Well, you know what? There've always been places that aren't well served. Mm-hmm. But I think there are plenty of places that will be well served. And I think that it's going to look better 5 years from now than it does today.
I hope so.
Seth Albaum, Senator Crighton.
Well, I'm borderline optimistic. I have to be in public access because of our, because of the decline of our revenue. But at the same time, we're raising our hands and we're saying we're here, we need help, we need to bring on new sources of revenue. But at the same time, I know that the day a local access facility cannot broadcast the school committee or city council, the city or town is going to say, well, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
We can't pay for this. Who's going to pay for this? And what we do is a little different from journalism. We do gavel to gavel. We just broadcast the whole thing without any input from the operator or staff person. So, but it needs to survive. But not just the government access, not just all the municipal meetings, but as a media literacy center, as a media access center, we have people come in to use the internet here. We talk about people who, they might form a Facebook group or a small online publication, but they don't have any journalism background. They don't have any training. We do the training. We do the training and we give you better equipment because, somebody on Facebook is using this If I had one of my cameras nearby, I'd show you. It's a lot more impressive and still a lot more capable than a phone. You know, we've adapted with the times here. Our funding needs to adapt with the times now.
I'm on it, Seth.
Thanks.
Just quickly, I mean, I'm optimistic as I must be as a politician. No one wants to hear me say we're all screwed.
Yeah, that would be really bad coming from you.
No, but I mean, first, I think I connected too much with politics, right? In trying to get folks to be more civic minded and to think about the community. But I think with that, you know, you can build more interest in the news in kind of the reverse way, right? If people are, you know, going out and knocking doors for a campaign or going to a community meeting, you know, they're engaged in the subject matter, what's happening locally. They're more likely to read, to click that link that they see on a friend's Facebook page, and to pay a little, you know, a very small amount of money to have that, you know, access to whatever, you know, newspaper's website. We had a cleanup the other day down at Kiley Park on Saturday. I think there were more volunteers there than were pieces of trash or leaves. It was just crazy. And that's been replicated throughout the city. You know, if we can build on this community involvement, get more people to run for office, to work on campaign, then, you know, that helps sustain kind of that local focus on what's going on. And maybe that helps. What scares me to death is and I don't even understand it, I don't have this app, but like, you know, I think Facebook or, you know, Instagram is the most popular. It's like the TikTok and the next thing that like continues to kind of erode any value of the written word. And that scares the hell out of me. Just, you know, if it has a good, you know, music too, if it's a quick video like that, and then you're all of a sudden being segued into something else that catches you. And, you know, obviously these companies have found a way to just plug into our brain and our sensory areas that, you know, really give us that rush. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, clicking onto a zoning article in the item, while so much more valuable than somebody dancing in a humorous way to a song, like you're going to click the video. And I don't know how you compete there. But I mean, that's one of the reasons we wanted to have the conversation, to have that, get the commission going. And thank you again to Lynn Community Television for putting this on for all of you. Because if we got to have a conversation, we got to have action attached to that conversation as well.
Carolina Trujillo, Chris Stevens, Dan Kennedy, Brendan Crighton, Seth Albaum, thank you very much for sharing your views. For LCTV, I'm Drew Russo. Thanks for watching.